comment.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to book club today. Joan and I are hosting a conversation about the design pathway for regenerating Earth by Joe Brewer, and we are going to talk about three chapters today, chapters 13, 14, and 15. And we try to spread that out about 20 minutes to each section to give it a little bit of space for that. So let's jump right in. On page 105 is chapter 13. And this chapter is talking about fundamentalism and, kind of risks from outside and within. So even if we have ourselves organizing, um, there can be these other threats. And so the discussion questions on page 109, the three discussion questions. How can we prepare ourselves individually and as families for the lockdown and takeover strategies of those with military power? Number two, what are the models of regeneration that we need to embody right now? And number three, how can we cooperate better in the coming weeks, months, and years?
I feel this is so prescient. It's just so timely right now. But I hopefully we can try and stay positive on this. I like question three.
Well, let's
Lean
start
into
there.
that, of how we can cooperate better. Because I feel like if we have a strong connection, that's the um, best defense is a good offense.
Well, I mean, I think I've mentioned before, I am edified by the idea that we have treaties and, centuries of agreements among people in this part of the world that even if a billionaire, aspiring trillionaire thinks that they can set new rules and overcome the will of 40 million people, maybe not, maybe we have a resilience in our shared understanding of the how important the Great Lakes. I mean, I'm speaking from, I know we're not all from the exact same area, but I'm hoping that the the reasonableness of having good water policy, having fresh drinkable water for our families, uh, is something that everyone can get behind.
I really feel, and I hope everyone can hear me. I'm in a off-grid situation, so do you want to give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. One of the things that's bringing hope in our community, and I was listening to you ladies talk about the weather. So we just came through two serious ice storms here, down trees, power outages. It was just really intense, actually. And these are always the moments where you see community come together. And, this reminds me of how powerful community is. And I'm often talking about this, but I feel really, really blessed to be in a community that, because of the Indigenous led water ceremonies, walks, paddles, where we're taking the wampums from sacred headwaters down to the mouths, that there's been almost 20 years now of relationships that are being built. And, one of our elders is coming in next week to share about land trust to help protect water commons. So I think one of the things we can ongoingly do, and it's coming up in the learning journey right now, is look to water to help us organize our local micro communities and really build the relationships with each other. And as we get to know each other as neighbors and have a common connection to, water, to the land, to our neighbors, and to what is happening socially and globally right now, I think we're finding ways to really show up in new ways that we just fundamentally haven't been able to do because we were so well invited into being isolated and doing our own things all the time. We've just come out of a system that is very uh, kind of unregenerative. And so I'm just really grateful to be in a community that is making creating practices to actually every day, every week, every month, get to know each other better and try on new regenerative circular systems that start to fill in some of the gaps around what creates these I feel like it's like they're like breaks in the circle, and I hear this word break a lot. There's a break in the hydrolytic in the water cycle. Like there's these broken pieces that we can heal together when we listen to each other's stories, when we share food, when we walk, and so this is just something that I'm kind of secretly trusting that there's some sort of a water club or something that starts to form soon where we can have liquid love conversations about how water is transforming. Or basically, it's like a guiding. When I paddle, for example, there's many of you who paddle will know about that sweet spot in the river. It's like when you find that sweet spot and water carries you in a good way without effort, there's something pretty magical about trusting and knowing that she always finds her way and she's going to help us find our way. And so in that trust and in that connection and in that flow, we find each other just being able to find that sweet spot through all of what's happening right now. So yeah, a big shout out to water in all of this work, and just thank you for this, these taking time to be in this book club. It's really nice to have a chance to just sink into some of this stuff with each other.
Go ahead, Michelle.
So I agree with the optimism, and I do share it, and I would love to lean most heavily into it. And maybe I've read too many dystopian novels. Like I think it's a Canadian Indigenous author, and there's two books, Moon of the New Crusted Snow, and then another one that are kind of post-collapse. And there's these, you know, people with weapons who find them and are very, very scary. Like there is a kind of a history of so-called civilization where the nations that prevail are not necessarily the most beautiful, soul-filled nations, but the ones with the best technology for guns or and so there's a part of me that says yes, we want love, not fear. But on the other hand, this part about not to be naive, that resources like water are like what happens if people don't understand the love, and how do we deal with that? So I guess that first question to me is kind of a practical, unfortunate question, but and it does engender fear, not love, but yeah, like there are tyrants and dictators and people who use terrorism.
There's a pattern that comes up for me in doing some internal work over time of how do I balance the compassion for others, but also hold my own boundaries. So, like as an individual level, then also at a like collective group level, how do you like manage that? That's like I don't know. Maybe it's easier for other people, but for me, that's a really hard thing to do. Um, the balance between those two, because I feel like a jerk sometimes when I hold my boundaries, but sometimes that's what's best. Um, so I'm curious to hear others' thoughts on how do you go about doing that as a group? Like, what boundaries might we I mean, I probably heard some of this before, and maybe a couple of people have mentioned it already tonight, but I haven't quite made the connections tonight. So I'm curious, like, what boundary violations do you see coming? Have you experienced in your work with um, regeneration work, and that sort of thing? And so, like maybe water rights, that sort of thing, or other stuff that I'm just not even thinking of. I'm just curious as to others' thoughts on making that balance.
Well, I can't help but think in this part of the world about like the pipeline that goes underneath Mackinac and the pipeline that is by the Bad River Reservation in about there. And um they are about and Dakota Access and Standing Rock and I mean all in this part of the world. And I'm thinking about how there's construction underway somewhere in a Middle Eastern country using labor enslavement, and people are dying, building cities in the desert and people are dying in enslavement kind of situation. And where I lived in Colorado, uh, there was an expression, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. One time I went to check on my honeybees that were on a property near the water source, and the sheriff was there because they had just disbanded some energy people were pulled a gun on neighbors pulling a gun on each other because of the acequias and the allotments and who has access to water and you can't turn your water off yet. You said you were going to, or your grandfather is a goat, or all these kinds of things that go back generations. Those are just a couple of ways that I'm thinking of it. Oh, and here in Wisconsin, Foxconn was going to build something, and they made a big situation where water from Lake Michigan, they had to get special permission to extract it, so now they can and build something, and then they never ended. Bunch of tax resources went to support this all happening, and then they never ended up building it there and creating the jobs and everything. But now I think Microsoft might be using it for a data center. So even though they intended for the water to be used one way, it gets used to different, like there's some trickery that comes to mind.
Well, there's that concern about hoarding, right? Like we need what we need to survive, but then there's these extractive mindset people and they're looking for profit and then they're looking to take more than their fair share. And I just feel like the mindset needs to be, well, okay, so as far as setting boundaries, like you put my mask on first, and then I start to look to help others, like the airline instructions is what I'm referring to. That, yeah, your self-care is important, but hopefully we can find enough people who are okay with, survive with just enough as opposed to trying to stockpile and hoard. The disturbing thing for me, I don't know if all of you have seen it, it was that Trump drew a line that was somewhere north of Lake Ontario between there and Georgian Bay as the new boundary he had in mind for the southern boundary of Canada. And you see like how arbitrary the boundary, it's just this thing that people have made up and and then everything's built around that. And I know like Cascadia, actually that bioregion straddles the international boundary. And so that is going to become more complex for now. But it's yeah. And this is, I guess it comes down to having strong relationships with people, building relationships based on trust. That's really, really important. And when you have a network like that, it can make for a lot of resilience, I guess, is what get us through.
I had, excuse me, I had great difficulty with this question because I have no experience with uh, any kind of eco village or uh, permaculture project or anything like that. Um, I do have some friends who are planning, would like to start an eco village. And I'm actually buying some gloves, and I'm going to go and help with planting for the first time in my life. So I've got to get my gardening gloves and such. I'm trying to get experience and to learn. But when I read this, the way I took it was from kind of like a prepper experience. And I've got like prepping experience, like canned goods and, all that kind of stuff. So I had to read the question over and over and over again to connect the second paragraph to the first one to see that it wasn't necessarily a prepper question. That's just kind of how I saw it. But from what I've read and from what I understand, it's about a change of thinking communally instead of, communal thinking instead of capitalist thinking and taking care of each other. But, in my neighborhood, like my neighbor took a machete out of his book bag the other day, and he carries that in a sling. And here in New York, there's a limit to how long a knife you can carry, but you can carry a knife if it's sheathed. And so what I see is, and he's a drug addict. And then the people on the other side that's a whole nother story. And I'm living in the hood, and I'm just seeing that. I haven't never really experienced that sense of community. So I really can't, contribute to this conversation, this question. I'd like to be able to, but I just wanted to say that to, throw that in there.
One thing that I read something recently, I can't remember what it was called, but it was kind of challenging this idea of like self-care and kind of like taking care of yourself first. And I think while that is really important, it was interesting. This article is saying that like if we want to move towards like really more kind of caring community kind of models, we need to shift of thinking of the self as the individual to the whole community, and therefore taking care of oneself first also involves taking care of like the community and people that we have kind of strong relationships with in that kind of primary place, which is really interesting, but also really difficult in practice. And difficult, I think, to like navigate that and yeah, with these boundaries and things. And I've been kind of like involved with a intentional community for a little bit. Not I've lived there like a few times, but not kind of permanently, just for some research that I've been doing. And it's interesting how like this community is really tight and really like has these really like foundational relationships, and they use like kind of a regenerative economic model where they share and kind of help each other, which is great. But then also there are so many like rifts and ups and downs within the community, and staying together and being resilient in troubling times has been like this kind of question there like the whole time. And there isn't really an answer. And it's something that I think, yeah, a lot of communities are figuring out. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is. But I'm kind of interested to learn more about different pathways forward, especially as like, we are in these especially troubling times now.
One of the things that came up for me, I forget what triggered it. I mean, just like a couple of minutes ago, was we have the way that most people are organized socially right now, like in the US, where have these weird boundaries, by state, that sort of thing. And by in organizing, we're looking at organizing bi-regionally. So there's that. And I was thinking of those as separate things, but what I can see happening if you organize bi-regionally in that, with that other context existing, what you're creating is bridges in between those other, like, I forget, there's like four states in like southwestern US, and they all like make like a little corner, like in the Colorado area. And but if you organize bioregionally, you're making like bridges in between those. If you look at it from the state point of view, you're creating bridges between all those four states. So there's if you create those bridges and that community and that trust and understanding, there's less likely to be, you're reducing the possibility of conflict and hopefully creating more probability for like a positive resolution to any potential conflicts that come up. I don't know if that resonates with anybody or.
How can we prepare ourselves for lockdown and takeover strategies of those with military power by having an eco-village? This is question number one. Like, how does any of this address being taken over by a military power? Am I misunderstanding that? Because if a military power comes over, we can be as eco-village as we want. Am I misunderstanding the question?
I think that's exactly what the question is. And I like, Dave, what you said about boundaries. And, my mind went to, like, I don't really want to have that I'm living behind a fort wall. But maybe there's a lot of poison ivy. But that doesn't stop guns, right? Like, yeah, that's because people who, like, the boundaries, you can work however we work within our eco village or within our bioregion, but how do we protect our boundaries, um unless there's some element of law or agreements or court. Like, that's what we tend to rely on in this world. We rely on treaties and agreements and the United Nations and conventions that say, you can't just take a tank and roll into something that's identified as another country, or it's a war. And I guess maybe you need, I don't know, do you need those kind of conventions to enforce your boundaries if you're talking about organizations? I'm kind of I come from a background of being a lawyer for a while, so I'm going to go to rules because that's my early training. But I think somehow I need to transcend another way to have those boundaries be effective.
One thing that's coming up for me is Grace, her last name starts with an R, who has, spoken in these spaces. She, well, today was talking about how this project that she's been working on based on, like, I think kind of like using blockchain to establish trusted identity, being able to say this person has this, trusted identity link, and that being a way of facilitating trusted communication within bioregions and across different bioregions, kind of as a passport, a digital passport. That's not her language at all. I'm just saying, that there may be some kind of digital signifier that facilitates, but I think we also must have analog ways of facilitating trust and understanding that we have a shared value of mutuality, of accountability to each other, about, transparency and, ability to trust that if someone says that they're going to pay a debt in legal currency or something like that, that they will, that like some really basic things that are falling apart in the way people are understanding how to behave with other people. I am watching the time, and this has been such a rich conversation, so I didn't want to be the taskmaster and advance us, but I do want to ask permission of the group. Do we want to keep on this chapter, or do we want to give some time to the other two chapters as well?
We may not solve this one even if we stayed on it.
For 5 years, I don't think we would. No.
Well, and I'm glad to have had the time to give it, 30 minutes of our thought, because you know, I hadn't read this book before I'm reading it. So here we are. So the next chapter, the elixir for our protection, and I think this is part of the solution, right, is that there are local people who know the magic potions to make to heal us. And we got to keep that local knowledge alive through living memory, by doing the things, by growing the herbs, by knowing where they grow in the wild, how to forage for them, and how to make the metaphorical medicine and literal medicines for the bioregion to function as a superorganism, like a beehive. And then the discussion questions we have starting on page 115. What can we learn from this concept of evolutionary transitions? How do symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationships become deeply integrated into the natural world? Number 2, how can we practice focusing on pro-social cooperation to achieve regenerative ecological goals? And the last question, do you believe in this elixir? Is it really possible for humans to cooperate harmoniously across territories and indeed the entire planet?
I think for me, it's important to believe that it's possible. Otherwise, you know, it's going to be kind of hard to do if we don't think it's going to happen. So I don't know. I tend to take this approach of it doesn't matter how dark it is. I think we can find a way. It may be long. It's going to be like really hard. There's going to be a lot of setbacks and failures, but you know what? There's still a way forward.
I feel like I've been holding kind of a tension within me as I've been reading these parts of the book, just like a part of me that's like, wants to be really hopeful and like optimistic about these things. And I think that like reading this and being in these kind of spaces is really helpful for that, like actually connecting with people and being able to like talk about it is really helpful for increasing that kind of that hopefulness and the belief. And then at the same time, there's also that kind of like tension with the part of myself that is a bit more pessimistic, a bit more kind of dystopian, and yeah, just unsure how to, like, if the idea is that we need to form these kind of symbiotic relationships and have these kind of integrated partnerships and collaborations, how do we get everyone involved in that, and is that possible, and is that even what we're working towards? I guess, is it like, because I don't know, I see some groups of people as being kind of beyond that kind of change and transformation. So I don't know. Yeah.
I'm wondering. I mean, I've read my share of dystopian fiction too, and I'm thinking about like Star Trek, or some of the um, Afrofuturistic, indigenous futurisms that have this sense of possibility. But what I'm thinking about, like even in Star Wars, like the stories of like jumping between different civilizations, that there might be a lot of desolation or something between that, but these surviving bioregions are the landing spots, and they're navigable, and there's some common language or currency or something so that you can land your starship in the port that understand, there's some sort of communicating protocol and things that can unite across a lot of difference. And in a lot of them, they're not even they're transcending even racialized difference to different life forms. And the comicalness of William Shatner making love to every kind of life form because he's just so in love with life. Um, anyway, I'm I know this is a very serious conversation. I mean, but that the idea that there are um, some surviving pockets that are in communication with each other, and that we have science and we have language and we have shared values, and the recognition that like permaculture is based on indigenous practice. And I'm kind of transitioning to the last chapter here too, but the idea of um, let's record the traditional ways of our local spaces in bioregional learning centers and in living knowledge keepers and elders being able to have ceremony or ritual or schooling, or however that transferring of knowledge between generations, so that the right kinds of stories survive, the pro-social ones, the ones that help people navigate what comes next or navigate change, and like permaculture and bioregioning do.
I really love how this has flowed, kind of like water, how like when you said the part about, like it's kind of like if we don't behave as if it's possible, it will never be possible, right? We have to we and yet we're holding that tension because we know that there's all kinds of risks and downsides, and yet we're going to hold that tension that we'll behave as if it's possible, because if we don't, we'll never get anywhere. And Karen, I think humor is probably a way to be able to keep talking about all of the stuff that's scary and the stuff that seems impossible that's good. Because you can use humor to kind of reinforce our values, or help us kind of shake off our fear a little, like so I think that those are all there. And maybe I like that idea of it's the like pollination, like milkweed. It sends all these seeds in the wind all over the place. And not all the seeds become a milkweed plant, and not all of them that are milkweed plants have pods. But if we spread this good ways of thinking, these good methods in the way that you talked about, Karen, like, and behave as if it's possible, even if it's only possible in one isolated place, it's better than if it doesn't happen, right?
Another metaphor that's coming up for me is, again, in this part of the world, a network of underground railroads, uh, stations that were not literally underground. They were, a way of conveying people to safety, and under the duress of a federal government that said you can, kill these people, or capture and kidnap people and take them over state lines, and enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act in the 1851, that is a big part of what I think of Wisconsin, what we call Wisconsin history, is our participation in that. And there, there may be people who need to move around. There might be for trans people, for example, who need to get out of a certain part of a place and get to another, or people who need medical care or whatever. And having a way of saying, these are trusted networks that we know in this country, in this region. If you can get to this train station, someone can meet you and help you. Like I don't I like when there are stories that that connect to that kind of spirit of resilience and liberation and solidarity across difference to get things done, because that may be part of this too. Things that seem stable, places where you grew up, you've had roots for generations, might change, and to know that there's someone in, a few hundred miles away, a few thousand miles away that might take you in, and you would do the same for them. That's a type of resilience. And that there are strangers who do that, and there
Right.
have probably always have been people who don't get taken any credit, but in a moment they make a choice like that. Well, 17 minutes, maybe we can transition lovingly into our last chapter for tonight. Chapter 15 starts on page 117. Our ancestors were all indigenous. And in this chapter, Joe Brewer goes into a little more of his personal interrogation of, who it is to not identify with a cultural heritage and how that happens to a lot of people, because, for a lot of different reasons, but the way colonialism has us thinking that, whiteness is about hamburgers and French fries and television and consumer culture, and to not even know what it means to be connected to a place. And um, I've spent some time thinking through some of some of the like the reasons why my ancestors came to Wisconsin was like religious persecution. They didn't want to serve in the Prussian army. There were empires and colonialism things going on in the parts of Europe that some of my ancestors were from, and so I get it that even that colonialism hurts everybody, and being able to connect to one's own story is important. So the three questions here, starting on page 121. Can you relate to the story of forgetting your ancestry? How has it affected your life until now? Number two, how have you learned to behave ethically toward the natural world? Were you taught by your parents? Was it from solitary reflections while immersed in nature? Are you struggling with this theme now? And the third question, how might you think differently about regenerative economies through the idea of peopled landscapes? What does this imply for how we could relate to non-human species?
I think for me, I've to a certain extent, I've always felt, I guess, disconnected, just because from nature, I guess is the way I could put it right now is just the way our society is abstracts us so far away from it. I just didn't. I mean, I had aspects of it, so I'd like go to a camp in the summer, when I was a child or something like that, and we learn about maybe some native edible plants and that sort of thing. But I didn't like grow up immersed in it. that it was like a different weird thing to like learn about those sorts of things. It's like a week at camp, or here's a short study in school, or um, when you're not actually out in nature itself, observing and being a part of it and that sort of thing. You're always abstracted away from it. So I'm learning to um, really connect with it fully. I remember I shared this in a couple other spaces. I remember as a child, some in fact has dropped off at the Dayton Museum of Natural History when I was a kid for a class, and I got so intrigued. They had an incubator for these baby chicks, and I stopped by there before the class, and I looked, and I saw one was starting. I had just started, so I was so excited to I just sat there and watched it for like 45 minutes and totally missed my class. So my dad was not too happy with me about that, but man, that was quite a lesson for me that day. So just stuff like that is I have fond memories of things like that as a child, like connecting in that way, and I'm trying to do more of that now as an adult, which it's kind of hard to do with like life happening with kids and responsibilities and that sort of thing. But I'm trying to make time where I can to reconnect in those sorts of ways.
When Sean and I were at the immersive in Barichara, it was remarkably evident that what Joe and Penny have been weaving together with the different land spaces that they've been securing back into this regenerative web was totally kindred to what we have in the Five Rivers here. She was raised, my daughter, Shora, who's almost 16 right now, was raised on the shores of the Aramosa River. She was never in a public school system. Then she transitioned to a regenerative and sheep, and we're talking about the secrets of the sugar bush and can relate to the Maple peoples. He talks about being a people of the land. We're peoples of the maples in this area. Again, I just always feel remarkably blessed when I hear about how other people feel like that's something that helps you feel indigenous to a place and to build those relationships. And ultimately, one of the biggest practices we've had is being able to go from headwater to mouth several times, multiple times a year, to get to know your waterways so well that they're like one of your best friends. And you can picture it starts to turn into turns where the sand hill cranes you just start to know all the different invisible lines of the migration patterns. It's just a really fun experience. So I feel overly blessed that most people don't necessarily have that experience. And I certainly hold space, as many of you know, to weave that into our experience. And I love how he talks about regenerative education and cross-pollination as one of the ways that we can connect to that feeling of being indigenous to a place.
The feeling of not being indigenous to place, or like forgetting that, is something that I've experienced for sure, and something that I'm kind of just learning how to navigate. And I feel like it coming back to place, or coming to place in a new way. But I think that it's something a lot of people experience, and a lot of people I've talked to who kind of feel this. I think part of that comes with feeling that there's a lack of stories that connect us to place. And because a lot of the stories from around here are Indigenous stories. And I think that some people, you know, where is that like line of like, appropriating story that's not, my own, not my culture's, and that kind of question of, how do we find belonging in spaces when we are descendants of colonial settlers and kind of navigating that tension. And yeah, it's something that is difficult and I'm still learning. But I think that like being in those spaces and like really connecting with the land and learning from it and like hearing the stories of the land from the land is something that's been really helpful for that.
I was reading a book by Ched Myers and his wife. Her last name, I think it's Elaine Enns, and they were making a point of as settler people, and they explored her side of the family with the Mennonite roots that had come from I think Russia, and all the trauma that was there that kind of explained some of the lack of connection of those early ancestors to the indigenous people who live there. And so there's a piece where, like, I live when I go to a water ceremony and they say, "What waters are you from?" I've got like several generations on my mother's side and my father's side from the Grand River, from, way back to when it was called Berlin, which is the First World War. So there's stories that connect me, but really more to the city, right? To the city than to but the other part of where did my people come from as settler people, I think there was this aspect of, they wanted to erase that, like um not not be connected as if we created ourselves or something. I don't know. So I think that understanding the roots of families and background um is and yet it's hard to do. So there's ways of connecting to the place where you are, and yet I'm in a place that give or take, like Kitchener and Cambridge are not very far away. It's 15 minutes by car. um and so I've got all these generations, but it's connected to the city, and it's connected to this culture that embraced the automobile and technology, as compared to now I suppose we do have our Canadian German recipes for food that really schmecks, and my father's side, the name Braniff has Celtic origins from Ireland. It's descendant of Black Raven, and I'm finding myself in this stage of my life really trying to explore that and understand that in a way to kind of give a context for my curiosity. So that question really resonated with me. Is when I talk to Indigenous people, they often have, even in the face of the residential school situation, there's I don't know, this shared understanding of the importance of the roots, and to explore it, that I feel like that's something that's missing from mainstream culture, at least in Canada.
I think that the first question resonated very deeply with me as well. I'm Guyanese, and my parents immigrated to the United States so that I could have a better life and he could go to school. And I experienced what Joe did. I was not popular with the other kids because I was very different. And I was a little black girl with a very strong British accent because we were from the former British Guyana, and they received we got our independence in 1966. So there was no more UK going on. But my father was a black man who, when he cursed, he said bloody hell. And that's kind of different, you know. And it was only after he got Alzheimer's that I actually heard him say the F word for the first time. But you know, I had such a strong accent, and so all the black kids, the American black kids, accused me of being white or thinking that I'm white because I didn't say things like y'all and you is, you know, which was very like common language. So I experienced what Joe did, that kind of alienation. But luckily for me, we had our foods, roti, curry, different things that, you know, Guyanese dishes, as well as music, everything from steel drums to calypso, and literature, certain types of literature and such, which helps me to stay grounded. And I worked very hard to lose my British accent, and I think it's gone, but I still don't sound quote unquote black. So, you know, that's been a continuing thing all my life. But so that resonated very deeply with me. And then the second question, you know, he asks, how did you learn to behave ethically toward the natural world? That didn't happen for me until I grew up. Nobody ever spoke to me about the natural world. I didn't even think of there being a natural world. There was just, that was outside, you know, either I was inside or I was outside. And that's as far as it went. So this, at my age, I'm 65, is really something very new for me. So, and I love it. Um, and it's been quite the learning experience for me. So I know I need to learn to relate better to nature, to my environment. And I'm beginning to see connections that I've never seen before. Mm.
I just got to say, Vivian, I cannot hear any British accent. Uh, and to me, it sounded a little bit like New York State, but I don't really know all my accents all over the place. But that's what it sounded like to me.
Wow. Well, I have lived in New York since 2000. So
Well, our hour is coming to a close. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. And we will do 3 more chapters 2 weeks from tonight. We'll meet back here, same bat channel. I hope you have a wonderful fortnight, a wonderful 2 weeks, and Maundy Thursday. So we're getting close to a full moon on the 12th. Will be the full moon. Anyway, have a wonderful evening, everyone, and we'll connect again soon. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank
This was
you.
great. Thanks for facilitating this.
My pleasure.